Some call it the CPI and some call it the CP lie. We're going to be digging into a little bit today. What is this 2% inflation that we always hear about? And why do we continually feel like we're getting poorer every single year and that life is getting harder and harder? An article popped up today talking about the Bank of England. The economists are saying that people need to accept that they are poorer. And a lot of people don't want to accept that because it sure doesn't feel very good. Now, as we go into the article, it says the Bank of England's top economist has said that people in the UK will have to accept that they're poor. Otherwise, prices will continue to rise. Now, we have to say that this is not a UK problem. This is a UK, this is United States and Canada and Japan and all over Europe and all the countries. I always joke that they're all on the same WhatsApp group and they're all saying print money now. And so, even for me, I have trouble because my whole life I have been using the term money when I see that paper bill. And there's a huge difference between money and currency. Money has a value. Fiat currency is just a representation. Remember, the word fiat, that printed money, is just faith based money. And we have to dig into a little bit what is all of that. Now, they are saying that we need people to feel poor, right? Otherwise, inflation is going to rise. So he told in this podcast that there's a reluctance to accept that, yes, we're all worse off. So this is a problem for sure, that people are worse off and people want to know why. So, of course, it's coming up in the news all the time. It could be the Putin price hikes or China this or whatever, but it can't just be one person since it's happening around the world. In addition, this phenomenon has been happening for thousands of years. So we got to dig into that a little bit more. So it is mentioning here that in response to higher bills and other costs rising, workers have responded by asking for wage increases and businesses were charging more. I mean, what else could they possibly do? Of course, they're going to ask for more of a wage increase, and that inflation in the UK has been higher than the Bank of England's target of 2% for some time. And it is all the time. 2%. I see it on the news 100 times a day. 2%, 2%. What on earth is that 2%? Even where we are in Canada, if you go to the Bank of Canada website, they want to say returning to the 2% inflation target will bring back the stability Canada has known for the past 30 years. And so nobody wants to mention that the reason why we've had 2% inflation is because we dumped an entire empire worth of goods from Russia at rock bottom prices. And we had 1 billion people in China willing to work for very low wages for decades. But now that those two things are going away, inflation cannot keep up. And inflation is a very, very complicated subject, actually. And so there is a danger to stray from the target that they're saying, of course. Now, if we look at this article, I thought this was kind of funny. A curious history of the Federal Reserve's 2% inflation target. This is United States. So if you look at it, though, it mentions that Canada, Australia, Japan, Israel are among many of the economies that include the 2% inflation rate, which is my point exactly. We're all drinking from the same Kool-Aid. Everybody's on the same WhatsApp group. 2%, 2%, 2%. I find it very funny. Then it says, where exactly did this 2% inflation rate dream originate? And this is my favorite sentence of this entire video. You would think that maybe somewhere in the Bible, God says he wants 2% inflation, says this professor of economics at Johns Hopkins University. So he's a consultant for the International Monetary Fund. We see the IMF everywhere. But notice this, it was invented oddly in New Zealand. In the 80s, New Zealand was facing incredibly high inflation when this new economist started work at the central bank. Notice this, which at the time was not independent from the government. This is key because everybody knows in the United States, the Federal Reserve is independent of the government. They are not supposed to be left or right. They're not supposed to be any part of that. Okay, so they're independent. Notice the guy who started this all worked for the government and they needed dough. They needed money as fast as possible. Okay, so he's saying, this is a direct quote. And I just one day, I said, well, actually, what we're trying to achieve price stability. Why don't we just have an inflation target? So this is the thing. If you raise up taxes very, very high, like in Canada, we're at 50%. They're like, if we could sneak another 2%, 3% in on inflation, now we're going to have a tax rate of 52, 53%. Remember, inflation is a silent tax and it is not an accident. It's designed to be that way. And people don't usually understand how inflation works, right? So the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Act in 1989 introduced an inflation targeting and policy that is now being used around the world. So remember, you guys, that was them sneaking in an extra couple percent of extra taxes. Now it says, notice the very first one after that, Canada, where I am, announced this inflation target in 91. The United Kingdom followed suit, then Sweden, Finland, everybody jumped on board because all of a sudden now everyone is excited. When you're dealing with the world of trillions of dollars in the economy, we now can juice an extra 2, 3, 4% out of everybody all the time. This is madness. This is great. I mean, this was their favorite thing that could have ever happened to them. So if we look at where we are in Canada and the United States, if you pay attention to it over the years, we are neck and neck, you guys. Canada and the United States are really, really close. I mean, if you stack up Lebanon and versus Venezuela, maybe they'd be tight, but Canada and the United States are very, very close. So when was inflation really, really bad? I mean, in recent memory, a lot of our parents and so forth saw inflation rates around 20%. 20% back in the late 80s. And so that broke the back of inflation. Again, that also came on from a lot of other things that happened, like the Arab Spring and so forth. And we also didn't have the USSR and didn't have China that were part of our economic policy at the time. So we are very neck and neck. But at the time, there was a guy named Paul Volcker. And in 1979, October 1979, Volcker declared at the Joint Economic Committee, the standard of living of the average American has to decline. I don't think you can escape that. And I think that this is very, very telling for where we are today. If you notice that in the United States today, in Canada today, we had Freeland that is saying that the quality of life of Canadians have to go down. In America, they said the quality of life of Americans has to go down. They also said that in 1979. They're also saying that in all the other countries today, we are poorer, and there's a reluctance for people to admit that this is what has to happen. But this, like I'm saying, is not a fugazi. It's not a weird thing. I mean, it's designed to be this way. So when we go and take a look at every single quarter, they're going to be putting out a lot of inflation numbers. So I just pulled up one just at random here, and this is in the United States for Consumer Price Index. So this is from March 2023, but it doesn't really matter. Please click any single one that you want. And when you go through it, you'll see that individual items, cereal is 13% up. Fuel, ironically, was down, but this is pre-OPEC cuts. So let's not include gas. But if you go down the list, this is tobacco is up 7, medical services up 8, transportation is up 14, airline fees are up 17, motor vehicle insurance up 15, motor vehicle repair up 13. And we could just go down the list. Rice is up 11. Everything, as you can see here, is up 15, 16, 13, 10, 15, 16%. Like, we're just going down the list and things are bananas. Eggs up 36%. That's a real kick in the can, eh? We don't like that one. But you can see that the numbers are very, very high. Look at that. Vegetables up 20%. So prices are all in these double digits across the board. Yet here comes the mega problem that we're facing right now. If you are looking at today, where is the inflation rate today? You could check out shadowstats.com, go to the inflation data. Do you notice that they're stating right now that inflation is at 5%? This right here. So it peaked at 9 and went down to 5 in the United States. This is a fundamental problem that you need to pay attention to because it affects you and the money that you're making at your job. So in the 1980s, this is what they did. They would grab a basket of food and put the same 10 items in it and pull up another basket with 10 items. Or they would take a brand new Toyota Corolla, same package year to year, and measure the two. Identical products. Then they started really messing with the inflation number because they still needed more cash. As they needed more cash, they can continually manipulate that number. Just as I'm showing you here, when we're taking a look at all of the list of individual items, that's all hitting double digits. And you and I know when we go to the store, it feels like we're paying 10, 15, 20% more. So when the government comes and releases a statement to us, regardless of what country you're in, but I'm saying North America, and they're going to say 4.8% or something, you're like, that doesn't seem right to me. I'm paying a lot more when I go to the store. It sure doesn't feel like 4.8%. So you feel like you're getting gaslit a little bit. But if you take a look at an article like this, we had different ways of measuring things. So in the 80s, we used item for item, exact item. So if in the 80s, you see today they're claiming it's at 5% here, but in reality, we're hitting somewhere around 13, 14% up here, which is probably what you're feeling today. But in the 90s, look at this. So 5% today, but the way that they measured it in the 90s, we'd only be over 8%, not near 14%. And so they continually readjust the way. And so here are some of the ways. Instead of taking a cookie cutter house and judging the exact same house by the purchase price a year later, which you and I know might be up 10, 20%, they're going to use owner vacant units and what that person thinks he can rent it for. Or instead of having a steak for a steak, they're going to say a steak substituted by ground turkey, and you can get the same amount of protein. They can mess things up. Instead of having fresh eggs, you can have egg powder, let's say. They can manipulate it in a way to make it reflect what you want. And I mean, this is like when you go on a date, and you got to put your best foot forward. Like they're going to try to manipulate things, and it kind of feels a little weird when they do that, right? I mean, that's why some people will say it's the CP lie, because you and I, when we're going into this, we feel like it is 14%, and we're having to base our investments based on the way that was true before, calculated properly. All right, so let's take an example for me and you and how we would actually look at this if it was me and you in a real world. Now, we have a lot of Bitcoin maximalists and gold standard people that really love the idea of going back to gold. But the amount of gold on the world is quite fixed. We do mine new stuff, but only 1% per year, barely anything. Bitcoin, we know, is maxed at 21 million. But just let's say we go back like a biblical story, Adam and Eve, okay? Like one person on earth, I drew a little guy, one person on earth with one house, and let's say his house was worth $1. I'm just trying to keep it easy, okay? One house, one guy, $1. Now, if he met a nice lady, he got married, and he had two kids, and the two kids both built a house. So now there would be three houses in all, completely three houses. But if there was only $1 supply in the entire planet, how much would each one of those three houses be worth now? Each house would be now worth 1/3 of $1 or 33 cents each. So here you have a guy who built a house, and many years later, once his son grew up and built those homes, his home now is worth 2/3 less. So obviously that doesn't make sense. So if there's a fixed amount of gold or a fixed amount of Bitcoin out there, that means over time your house would technically be worth less and less and less. How do you build a mortgage on that based paying interest on a declining value, right? So if you only had 21 million Bitcoin, that means you can only have 21 million homes, but on the planet there's like billions of homes. So how would you divide that? This is where we get into a problem. Fixed supply never works, cannot work. All right. So here is the thing is we need to create more money, more dollars to make it equal. This is key. You need to create more dollars in the system so that each house can be worth $1 on its own. This is very, very, very important that happens. So let's continue on with that. Now, let's just say we have to expand the money supply. This is what we're understanding here, right? We need to expand it. Okay, how much do we expand it? Well, we know that when you make $100 here in Canada, they're taking about $50 in tax. But the $50 is not all they're taking from you. They're actually taking 50% plus inflation. And inflation is the invisible tax. So the question is it 50% plus 2%? Was what the goal is. They keep mentioning we want inflation to be at 2%. Please make it 2%. So we know that 2% reduces your quality of life by 2%. So if you lose 50% tax and they still get their 2% on the other side of through inflation, now they're making 52. But look at the chart that we just looked at, guys. Inflation today is actually closer to 14%, not 2%. So they're actually making, what are they making? 50% plus 14%. So now this is a way for them to get a lot more money out of people. So let's take an example. How do you make that extra money with inflation? How do they do that? So let's just play an example here. Now, I wrote a company, but this could also be a country if we wanted to. It doesn't matter. I drew a little plant here with a little car coming out. This looks like a giga plant, right? So let's just say that the company made $1 billion per year and they pay their workers 500 million per year. Now they're giving their employees half. Let's just say, as a thought experiment, the government decides to print, we're going to be using easy numbers, double the amount of currency, double the amount of pieces of paper that say 100 on. Okay. So just let's say for a second, there was 1 billion in existence and the company made the full billion. Okay. So now they decided to double it. So now the company would have to double their prices. So they would make $2 billion now in income. And what would they have to do? They would have to double the price of the car that they're selling, right? The car would have to go from 50,000 to 100,000 per car because the paper is worth less. But now where is the game? In theory, they should now continue to pay the employees 1 billion. They have to double it from 500. So if they have to double their price on the car, they also are doubling their revenue and they should be doubling the pay of the workers. Would we all agree? I think so. So that if now they make 2 billion revenue, they have to pay half, 1 billion to the workers. That's what they should do. But they would never do that. They're going to go, okay, guys, we're going to give you a 50% increase. And now we're going to pay you 750 million. But here's the problem. Though they made 500 million before, they're making 750 million now, which is a 50% increase. This is how the companies will say, you should be thankful. You're getting a 50% increase. But guys, they're still down. They're negative 50% on purchasing power, what you can buy. If you want to measure how many cars you can buy, how many loaves of bread you could buy, that's your problem. So let's just say here on your $500 million that they had, that they could buy 500 million Coca-Colas, okay? But now at 750 million, the question is, would they be able to buy? No, they wouldn't. They'd probably only be able to buy something like 350 million, 350 mil. So this is the problem, is that their purchasing power has gone down. They cannot buy what they bought before. So in this example, when the currency was manipulated, because your wage did not increase, your quality of life went down. You cannot look at things in dollar value. That doesn't work. It has never worked. And this is why people look at things like gold and silver, because if you take something like this and you go back in time, I could have bought 2,000 loaves of bread with this 1,000 years ago. I could have bought 2,000 loaves of bread with this 100 years ago, 2,000 loaves of bread 50 years ago, 2,000 loaves of bread today. This same thing, though, was worth $20 100 years ago. And in the 80s, this was worth $250. And today it's worth, in Canada, 2,700. In the United States, it's worth 2,000. So the amount of bread that it could buy me has not changed. The amount of car that it could buy me has not changed. What has changed is we printed a lot more dollars. This 2% that everybody talks about was invented out of thin air. And people can kind of get upset by the fact that they invented it out of thin air. But I also have to tell you that the money that we've created, dollars and cents, was also created out of thin air. Yesterday, Amazon came out with some new news. And when the news came out, the after hours, that was at 4 p.m., instantly on the aftermarket, the stock shot up like 12%. It created something like $150 billion of value within a second. Algorithmic trading bots invented out of thin air $150 billion. That's worth like many, many, many companies on the S&P 500 within minutes, within 2 minutes. And guess what? Within an hour, the 150 billion disappeared. The stock came down in price and all that value went away. So within a couple minutes, how could you create 150 billion and having it taken away? This is the exact same thing that governments can do, is that they can, with the power of an email, just send $100 billion. When we're seeing banks collapsing in the United States and all the contagion that is out there, we're seeing people and invent hundreds of billions of pieces of paper. A $20 bill. Anyways, it's electronic. I know they're not printing it, but that's what we mean is that they're creating it. In the old days, if we go back 100 years, we actually had bills that would say that this bill is, you can go to the bank and hand it in for silver or hand it in for gold. It was redeemable. But today, it's not like that. So back then, they had those handcuffs on them to not allow that. So this is where we can be really, really smart about it. If an economy grows by 2%, we need to, if we go back to our example, we need to print 2% more money to keep things even. If the economy was on fire, hot, 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 and goes 3% in a year, we got to print 3% more money. But here comes the key is if the economy shrinks by 2%, we now have to light on fire 2% of the currency. But this also would take away a big benefit that governments have to manipulate it and to help them pay off their debt. Did you notice in the example that we used that in this example that the company actually was the one that made off like bandits? Okay. They're the ones that made a whole bunch of moolah. So instead of paying the employees, instead of 500 million before and increasing it to 1 billion over here, they only paid their employees 750 million. So you have to ask yourself, where did the 250 billion dollars go? It went straight into the pocket of the company, or we can call it the country. And this is what is happening today. So a lot of things that governments around the world do is they have cost of living adjustments. So this could be in the States, they call it COLA, COLA, cost of living adjustment. But everybody on welfare gets their pay adjusted based on inflation. Everybody that has a disability based on inflation. Medicare, Medicaid, veteran affairs, all those people on pensions that worked for the government in the past, we're talking tens of millions of people, all of them based on inflation. And so if inflation goes too high, they got to pay everybody. But if they can pull this magic trick and make inflation be 10% and only give their employees a 2% wage, they just made 8% more money. The government made an extra 8% tax, and your life is going to become 8% harder to live. This system has been around since ancient Greece in 600 BC. It was the same when Rome was around and Jesus was walking the earth. They used to take in gold coins, melt them down, add a little bit of tin to it, and send them back out only 90% gold instead of 100. And they just did this over and over again until there was no gold left in the coins. This game has been played over and over again. This is why I try to tell you that financial education is the absolute key, because you could turn yourself into the country, that company, or the banks and be able to make money the same way if you understand the difference between money and currency. Real hard value. This is money. There's value for it. At any time, anywhere, they will accept this as currency. But if you go to a place that is a fallen currency, if we're thinking places like Argentina, Lebanon, or like, let's say even Zimbabwe that absolutely went to zero, they're about to go to zero again. Or if we look at the Weimar Republic, which is very famous in the 30s, overnight, your money is worth nothing. So you're telling me if I had a piece of paper bill and tonight it would buy me a meal, but tomorrow it will buy me zero. What happened? So there was no intrinsic value to it. And that's what the difference between money and currency is. But if you can learn to do this, you'll never have to work again. That's why we always try to stress financial education is the key, you guys. So we're never going to be able to beat the system as much as we look at it and study it and want to change it. You and I are like nobody. I'm a, what does Mr. Wonderful call it always? You're a cockroach, right? You're nothing. So we're not going to change it. So we have to learn how to play the game that they set up for us. We're going to have to be the one to learn how to make money with it. Talking about Mr. Wonderful, you guys, I really think that I was thinking, who is be the best guy to run our country? I'm kind of thinking just abolish the Senate and everything, and let's just go with Mr. Wonderful and run this place like a business, and we'll make a lot more money. Is this crazy? Anyway, I want you to give me some thought about behind that. And I think Mr. Wonderful is my top pick right now for Supreme Ruler of Canada. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, guys. Have a great night.